My name is Luis Enrique Zambrano, and I'm an intern for Julian Castro. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about myself. I was born in Des Moines, Iowa. At 5 years of age, I moved to Mexico, and I lived there 10 years. I had to come back from Mexico because my mom married someone from here. It was a very difficult transition because I didn't speak the language. I didn't speak any Spanish. I believe I only had like 1 or 2 sentences that I could say. I remember I went to a restaurant. I was helping out my sister. She was doing some serving, and one of the customers told me, I think she was asking for like some sour cream or something like that. And I was like, "Do you have sour cream?" And I'm like, "No." So it was bad. I didn't speak anything. I started high school, and it was super difficult because, like I said, I couldn't speak to my teachers. I couldn't do shopping. It was just a hard time. I was discriminated. I was made fun of just for my accent or how I look. It was bad. That's what initially drew me to Julian Castro, actually, because he has overcame so many obstacles himself. I'm pretty sure he has made fun of before too, and also people have been racist to him also. It's been a hard time. I was also going to speak a little bit in Spanish. If that's okay with you guys. Bienvenidos a todos por estar aquí. Les quiero hablar un poquito acerca de mí. A los 5 años me moví para México y viví allá 10 años. Fue una transición muy difícil cuando me tuve que mover para acá cuando tenía 16. No sabía hablar nada de inglés y era muy difícil comunicarme con las personas. Fue una parte muy difícil de mi vida y estoy muy feliz que puedo estar aquí hablando frente de todos ustedes. And I'm really happy to be able to speak to everyone here today in English. Even though it's fine. That's why we're here today. Today we're here to talk about the big issue, right? Gun violence. Castro took his time to come here and speak, which is amazing. And for my knowledge, he's the only candidate that has the spine to come here and speak about the issues that are happening today. It is my honor to present to you today Secretary Castro.
Let me just start off by, let's give another round of applause. We're really proud of all of the interns on our campaign. In fact, not only are we proud of them and happy that we're giving them good experience, we're also paying our interns at least $15 an hour. Become an intern, right? You actually provide opportunity for folks. I'm Julian Castro, and I often say these days that I feel like I need a name tag because I have a twin brother, Joaquin. Some of you may have seen my twin brother. He does have a beard right now, so it's easy to tell us apart. But he's always like on Wolf Blitzer's show or Chris Matthews on Hardball. He represents the 20th Congressional District of Texas in our hometown of San Antonio. And he likes to say that the way to tell us apart is that I'm 1 minute uglier than he is. Which is not true for 2 reasons. Number one, with that beard, he's definitely uglier than me. But more seriously, I'm 1 minute older than he is. We're going to have a conversation, and I really want to take questions and give answers on this issue of gun violence prevention and linking that up with some of the dangerous extremism that we see in our country right now. But I thought I might spend a few minutes just telling you a little bit about myself, why I'm running for president, and what I'd like to do, and then expand on what I believe we need to do in the years to come, and hopefully sooner than that when it comes to gun violence prevention. Joaquin and I grew up in San Antonio with my mom and my grandmother, and my grandmother had come over from Mexico when she was 7 because her parents both died, and her closest relatives lived in San Antonio. And so she and her little sister came over in 1922. They yanked my grandmother out of school when she was in 3rd or 4th grade, so she never really got a formal education. And because of that, ended up working as a maid, a cook, and a babysitter, and raised my mom as a single parent. My mom raised my brother and me as a single parent after our parents split up when we were 8. My brother and I are proud products of the public schools of San Antonio. Hopefully we have some teachers here. Yes. My dad was a teacher for 31 years in the public schools. My wife is a public school educator now. She just started her 16th year. Joaquin and I both had the opportunity to go on to Stanford and then to Harvard Law School. We went together because I can't get rid of my brother. And then came back home and became professionals as attorneys. The first in our family to become professionals. And then I went into public service. I ran for city council when I was 26 years old and served for 4 years. I lost a close mayor's race in my hometown of San Antonio, which I'm sure people have been to. Several people probably have been to, like the Alamo and the Riverwalk and the Spurs that we're proud of. It's a city now of about 1.5 million people. It's the 7th largest city proper in the United States. Came back 4 years later and won because we had strict term limits, and so I became mayor of my hometown, and I was there for 5 years as the mayor until I got a phone call on April 16, 2014. From President Barack Obama. And I always tell people, you know, that I remember the date because it's not every day that the president calls you and asks you if you want a job. I had just gone through the drive-thru at Panda Express. You know, on your phone it'll say like unknown or block call, right? Or sometimes it has a weird number from Russia or something like that these days. That's true. Have any of y'all seen that? Like a weird number, it said Russia on there. Like, I'm not answering that. It said private. The phone call when he called said private. So, if you ever get a phone call that says private, hopefully it's going to be me on the other end. Well, I did answer the phone, and I ended up serving 2.5 years as Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. And during that time, managed a department with a $48 billion budget, with 8,000 employees, with 54 field offices across the country. Had the chance to see how communities, big and small across our country, because I went to 100 different communities in 39 states across the United States. I saw how they're grappling with not only housing, but everything that is connected to that. The fact that where you live often determines the quality of your child's education. It determines what kind of job opportunities are available to you, oftentimes. In some places, like some of the smaller towns here and rural communities in Iowa, it determines your healthcare access. Because hospitals have been either closing or closing units, like inpatient psychiatric units or OBGYN units. In places like Flint, Michigan, that I visited when I was HUD Secretary during the Flint water crisis, and that I revisited about 2 months ago, where you live determines something as simple as whether you can drink clean water or not. And so, you know, there's a powerful relationship between where we live and how well we do in our country. And I'm running for president because I believe that everybody counts. I want an America that is smarter, healthier, fairer, and more prosperous. That's my vision for the future of the country, that we become the smartest, the healthiest, the fairest, and most prosperous nation on earth in the 21st century. And so, over the last 7 months, I've been campaigning, not only here in Iowa and New Hampshire, but I pledged to visit all 50 states, and I think we've done 20-something so far. I've been to places like Utah and Idaho and Tennessee and other places that Democrats don't usually go. My first visit after I announced was to San Juan, Puerto Rico, to tell the people of the island that we're thinking about them as they continue to recover after Hurricane Maria. And again, with this vision that all of us count, which I think has been sorely missing over the last 2 years. I've been talking about how we get smarter as a country, investing in universal pre-K for 3 and 4-year-olds. When I was mayor of San Antonio, we put a ballot initiative called Pre-K for SA on the ballot to raise the sales tax by 1/8 of a cent so that we can significantly expand high-quality full-day pre-K for 4-year-olds. And the voters of San Antonio approved it, and today we have one of the best pre-K programs in the nation called Pre-K for SA. I've laid out a plan on education of how to improve K-12 education, including a teacher tax credit that would start at $2,000 for all teachers and then scale up according to the percentage of students in the school that a teacher teaches in that are on free or reduced lunch, so that we incentivize teachers to go into the toughest school districts. Whether that's in a small town, it can sometimes be hard to recruit teachers to smaller communities, to poor communities, rural or urban. And I believe, like I know a lot of you do, that because jobs require more knowledge and more skill today, and we're competing against countries around the world that are also producing some very sharp young people that are talented, they're ambitious, they're innovative, they're creative, we need to make sure that everybody can get a good higher education. So I called for tuition-free public state universities, community colleges, job training and certification programs, and also reinvesting in trade education in our high schools to fill a skills gap that often exists, but that would allow people to get good gainful employment if that's what they want to do. And I know that y'all have some good programs here in Iowa. I visited one of them not too long ago. I've talked about changing our healthcare system to one that is based off of Medicare, so that we strengthen Medicare for the people who are on it, and then we expand it to anybody who wants it. But also that if somebody has a strong private health insurance plan that is solid, that they want to hold on to, I believe that they should be able to hold on to it. That we can accomplish both of those things. What I don't believe is that the profit motive of big pharma or big insurance companies should ever dictate whether somebody gets care or not. Because unfortunately, although I know some people like their insurance, but too oftentimes for a lot of people, the difference between health care and health insurance is that health insurance is the denial letter that you get telling you the 2 or 3 reasons why you're not going to be covered when you really need it. We can't have that in the United States. We also need to do things like end the distinction between physical health care and mental health care and invest in mental health care. How we become a fairer nation, ensuring that we invest in public defenders, sentencing reform, cash bail reform, diversion programs so that less young people especially get caught up in this criminal justice system and get this big black X on their record that makes it harder for them to get onto a productive path in life. I believe that we can do things like legalize marijuana. We've seen it done successfully, that we can regulate that well. And the officers who were injured today in Philadelphia are at the top of our mind and our heart. Our heart goes out to them, their families, and the people of Philadelphia, for those of y'all that saw what happened in the news. I also believe that we can work with police officers and police departments to improve policing as part of criminal justice reform, so that no matter who you are in this country, what neighborhood you're from, or how much money you have or don't have, or the color of your skin, that you're treated the same by law enforcement. And that we invest in groups that are working to mend the rift that too often exists between police and community, so that every time somebody in this country sees a police officer, they feel that that's welcoming and that the person is there to make them safer. And we want our police officers to be well compensated and also seen as always well respected, right? That's going to take work that we still need to do in our country. Finally, I talked about how we become more prosperous. For the last 40 years, as folks here can attest, we have been on this one-way track toward expecting less and less from people at the very top and from big corporations, and expecting more and more from the middle class and the working poor. And we need to turn that on its head. Amazon is a good example of that. I'm sure folks have heard many times by now that last year, They made $11 billion in profit, but they didn't pay any federal tax. There were 60 different American companies that are well-known companies that were identified that were profitable, but didn't pay any tax. In fact, some of them had a negative tax liability. They got a rebate. How is it that Amazon and the person that owns it is worth, what, $100 billion? How is it that Amazon pays less in federal taxes than you and your family? Except that we have a broken tax system in our country. Right? My tax plan, among other things, would raise the corporate tax rate. It would repeal and replace the Trump tax cuts with a tax system that benefits the middle class.
Yeah.
It would also close some of these loopholes that are basically the product of special interests and lobbyists that are able to sneak in provisions into legislation. And we would find other ways to be able to fund what I see as a 21st century safety net. A good example of that is the National Housing Trust Fund. The National Housing Trust Fund was started in 2015 to provide funds to create housing for extremely low-income individuals. These are the poorest of the poor Americans, people that are making less than 30% of the area median income. It's funded by taking a transaction fee from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which are basically the government-sponsored entities. And you know, it started off modestly at about $174 million a year. You know, when you're doing a national program, that's very, very modest. My plan calls for expanding that significantly in the years to come, and that's how we would do it. And that's a model for how we can do other revenue raising, is something that is not directly a tax on individuals, but is a creative way to raise revenue. We also, if we're going to be more prosperous, we need to reform our immigration system. I'm sure y'all have heard me in the debates and out there on the stump. I haven't been shy about saying that I have a different way for us to be successful on immigration. I think the President and I agree, and I think a lot of Americans agree, that we always need to maintain a secure border. Right? I'm from Texas, only a few hours away from the border. We have thousands of personnel down there now. We have 654 miles of fencing, we have planes, we have helicopters, we have boats, we have security cameras. We can maintain a secure border. But I want us to use common sense and compassion instead of cruelty. I don't want any more family separation. And I want us to get to the root cause of this challenge. I'd like a 21st century Marshall Plan with Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. Over there at home, instead of having to come to the United States to try and find it, right? And that we fix our broken legal immigration system. Because if any of y'all have relatives or friends and you're trying to become a citizen, people often wonder, well, hey, why don't you just do it the legal way? Look, I understand that's a legitimate question, but have folks seen how long it takes to become a citizen the legal way? It can take 20 years. We need to fix that. There's no reason that people should have to wait that long. And my immigration plan calls for making the investments to do that. Finally, if we want to be more prosperous, it means that we have to address climate change. My first executive order and then to invest in sustainability so that we get our allies and our adversaries around the world to make new commitments so that we ensure that at latest we get to net zero on carbon emissions by 2050. And we also create jobs and opportunity in the clean energy economy. Don't let anybody tell you that we can't do both of these things. We can protect our planet, but also we can make sure that the United States and not China or another country is the leader in the 21st century when it comes to putting people to work in the solar energy industry or the wind energy industry or biofuels or a whole bunch of other categories of jobs. That's part of the answer to the future of how we want to prosper in this country, and we shouldn't be shy about linking those two things together because both of them are things that we need to do. One of them is a must-do to protect our planet, and we know that the UN has said about a year ago that we have about a dozen years to get serious about this, to take the right steps, or the consequences could be tragic. And just a couple of days ago, there was another report that y'all may have seen that was released that said that our food supply is being negatively impacted by climate change. And so all of the red flags and the alarms are going off right now. We can't afford to keep our head in the sand, and not we, certain people in DC, you know, one of them sitting in the Oval Office right now. I believe that we need to move forward immediately with those investments. Maybe by the end, all of them are going to they're going to do like a time-lapse video and put it on Twitter. So let me just jump into the main reason that we're here today. I want to thank the folks who are here from Moms to Men. I was saying the other day, I saw Shannon Watts. We had a forum the other day that I think at about 70% of the events that we go to, somebody's there with a t-shirt. Thank you also for your activism and everybody else who has been active on this issue. Look, the need for common sense gun safety legislation has existed in our country now for a long time. Even more so after the assault weapons ban expired in 2004. We never should have let it expire in the first place. A few days ago, I proposed what I call a disarm hate policy for America. And it basically has two components. The first component recognizes that we have a growing extremism. In the latest example in El Paso, represented by white nationalism, white supremacy, right, that has motivated folks like the shooter in Charleston a few years ago in 2015, obviously the shooter in El Paso, others. And the question is, what do we do about that? So my plan would give tools to the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Justice resources to be able to root that out, to work with the private sector, the public sector, and the nonprofit sector, to root it out and to respond in the future to create better cross-cultural understanding in our country. Right now, or over the last couple of years, this administration has actually subtracted from the budget in the Department of Homeland Security that was responsible, the division that was responsible for rooting out extremism. But we've been going in the wrong direction because they cut that budget by about 85%. I would restore that and then add funds to that so that we can meet the challenge of a growing unrest in this country. And you look around the world, look at Europe. The United States is not the only country that is facing this. In many ways, these European countries are facing it even more than we are. And so we would be wise to make the investment now. Secondly, our social media platforms have a responsibility here to be more active in identifying people who post racially vitriolic material, who use that as a platform to spread their ideas and then gather support for those kinds of ideas. Obviously, we do have to be careful because we want to respect freedom of speech in this country, right? This is the United States of America. We're proud of our First Amendment. But I believe that we can strike a balance and be better at being able to ferret out when free speech turns into something else. Third, I'm really convinced that in the long run, it's up to each of us in our own families and also the important institutions that make up how we grow up, our schools, our churches, our community associations, to do as good a job as they can of promoting cross-cultural, cross-religious understanding of one another. The thing that disappoints me the most about this president is that I think we have been getting better as a country in terms of the youngest generation. If you measure the attitudes of the youngest generation, generation after generation, they've been getting more tolerant, more open to people who are different from them, no matter what their background is, more wanting to engage other people of different religions, different faiths, different skin colors, different backgrounds in our country. What really gets to me is that this president is setting an example and sending a message that it's okay for them to dislike other people, for them to otherize other people. This idea of an invasion of folks from south of the border. It gets to me because as a parent, I want my children to grow up and to see people for who they are inside, not just outside. and we were getting better as a country. But I think this president is fanning the flames of division and bigotry in a way that can't end soon enough. The second part of my plan to disarm hate goes to the mechanics of what we do to disconnect extremist ideology from the ability to actually go and kill 22 people, like that shooter did in El Paso. So what would I do? My plan calls for all of the common sense gun safety legislation that we hear about, renewed assault weapons ban, limiting the capacity of magazines to no more than 10 rounds. It calls for universal background checks. It also calls for requiring a license to own a firearm. It requires everybody who has one of the assault weapons that would be part of a new assault weapons ban to register that weapon specifically, and pairs that with a buyback program so that we can get a lot of those off the street. It would impose a greater excise tax on firearms and on ammunition. Right now it's 10%. We would raise it to 20%. And use the $600 to $700 annually to invest in community groups that are working on gun violence prevention in places across the United States. I thought I had a camera person. The point of all that is, we know that folks are going to have firearms for self-defense, for hunting, for sporting. But nobody needs to have one of those AR-15s that they go and they use on the streets. If you require a license to drive a car, or a license for any number of other things that you want to do out there, why not require a license to own a firearm? I would impose a 7-day waiting period for the background check. And we want to give local communities the tools that they need to build out gun violence prevention education and responsible gun ownership for those who do own firearms. In addition to that, and now I want to connect the dots between what I talked about earlier with our healthcare system and one of the challenges that we have when it comes to gun deaths. As many of y'all probably know, more than half of the gun deaths in our country are deaths by suicide, mostly with handgun. And we don't talk about that enough, but that's the reality out there. So what can we do to address this part of it? We can implement extreme risk protection orders that would allow family members to go and get a protection order if somebody's posing a threat to themselves or to other people. We need to invest in mental health care much more than we have before, and work to end the stigma that is associated with mental health issues. Because a lot of people right now, they suffer in silence with depression, or with bipolar disorder, or with schizophrenia. And now, I want to be clear, I'm addressing this separately from what I think is one of the excuses that Republicans use to never actually do anything. They simply point to mental health, and they use that, I think, as a scapegoat. And in fact, I think they make things worse for people with mental health challenges when they do that. Okay? But I do believe that there's a role to link this up to deaths that are death by suicide. And it points out the need to invest in better mental health care in our country. And I would do that as president. So, I'm going to take some questions that folks have, but what do we want in our country? Right? What do we want as parents, as grandparents? We want to be able to raise our kids, no matter who we are, for them to get a good education and to be safe where they're at, not have to worry about what's going to happen at school, and be able to do well in school and graduate and then go on to higher education, or if they're going to go into the military or go into the working world, and to reach their dreams. My daughter just started the 5th grade, and she's 10 years old, and by the way, I'm sure parents can commiserate. It's true what they say, that time just flies by. But it strikes my wife Erica and me that we have basically 8 years until our daughter is out of the house. And I also know those are probably going to be some interesting 8 years. But you see your child grow up in a heartbeat, and you want your child, if somebody said, just tell me one thing right away that you want, you would say, I want them to reach their dreams. I want them to be happy. Right? In this 21st century, we need a president that is focused on making sure that families, with their hard work, also have the tools that they need so that your children, your grandchildren can be happy, that they can reach their dreams in this country. That's what I'm focused on. Whether the issue is gun violence prevention or dealing with extremism or healthcare or equality or our criminal justice system, that's what I think that we need to be focused on. And I want you to know that if I'm elected president, that I'm not going to spend my time insulting people on Twitter or trying to pick fights with world leaders, threatening nuclear war with North Korea, insulting other politicians, going to a golf course that I pocket some money from. I will spend my time trying to make sure that you and your family can have good health care when you need it, that your children, your grandchildren can get a good education in our country, and that you can have good job opportunities, whether you live in a small town or in a big city, and that our families can be safe from gun violence and in every other way. Thank you very much. There you go. He's got the Harvard colors on. Anybody have a question? Yes, ma'am.
So my question is, you noted that you want to pass like common sense reforms, and it seems to me that we don't have a dearth of ideas of how to solve the gun problem, right? And really the problem is that there are barriers to getting these passed, and that's where the ideas fail. So I guess, what are the challenges that you envision, say you become president, that you would confront in trying to get some of these passed, and how would you address them?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. Let me start off with what I believe is going to happen, and then I'll address the harder case if it doesn't. But I believe on January 20th, 2021 at 12:01 p.m. that we're going to have a Democratic president, a Democratic House, and a Democratic Senate. So we may not, even if we get that though, we may not have 60 votes, right? I mean, that's a very tall order. I have said very clearly that if the choice is between something like common sense gun safety legislation or adhering to a 60-vote filibuster rule that both parties have basically broken when it suited their political needs, I will choose making our families safer by pushing forward common sense gun safety legislation so that we don't need 60 votes in the Senate. I believe that we can pass it in the House. As you know, the legislation was taken up in the House. So I actually believe we have a realistic scenario to get something done in 2021. But let's say that it doesn't go quite as well as we thought, and Mitch McConnell is still there. Yeah, I know. Don't even want to think about that. I think you'll get beaten in Kentucky, and we won't have to. But if he is there, there are two tracks that we need to take. Number one, we need to look at, through executive authority, legally, what can we do? And there are two things that I've identified in my disarm hate plan that I would do immediately. Number one, I would redefine what constitutes a firearms dealer. So that if you sell 5 or more weapons in a year, that you have to get a firearms dealer license and do universal background checks. You have to do the background checks that go along with being a firearms dealer. We can do that through executive authority. Secondly, I would include under the definition or the scope of the Violence Against Women Act, VAWA, unmarried domestic partners, who also would be empowered to get certain court orders that would protect them. In addition to that, I believe that in the Senate, there are some Republicans that still represent states that are swing states. And what they see is the landscape of this changing underneath their feet. Y'all saw that footage the other day where Governor Mike DeWine in Ohio, after what happened in Dayton, he thought that he was going to go there and he was just going to say the same things that these politicians always say to calm people down in the moment, and then they don't do anything. And what did the people of Ohio that were there do? That was not a Democratic rally. Those were Republicans and Democrats, and people that probably aren't even that political, some of them. They started chanting, do something, do something, do something. That sentiment, I think, is stronger now than ever before. And, and I mean this to say, being a realist, I certainly hope I'm wrong on this, but you all know that on the track we're on, it's very unlikely that those will be the last events that we see like that in Dayton and El Paso, unfortunately. And so this is not going away. This problem that we're having is not going away, and people's growing anger at the inaction of these politicians is not going to go away either. That's why I actually do believe that some of these senators that are in vulnerable districts, that there is an opportunity to press the case there and to flip them. Now, will it require negotiation? Excuse me, absolutely. I mean, everybody here knows that you're not going to get, on any issue, no matter what the issue is, you're not going to get 100% of what you want. They're not going to get 100% of what they want. Sometimes, like they're trying now, they may try and sneak poison pills in, like what they're thinking about, as I understand it, is, okay, we'll give you universal background checks, but then you need to okay reciprocity so that people could open carry or concealed carry in different states, right? If you're in New York, that would not pass concealed carry, right? Or another blue state, no, all of a sudden you have to honor those laws. They're going to try and work in clever ways to subvert it, right? To submarine it. But I believe that the activism and the just common sense of a lot of mothers and fathers out there, whether they're Republican or Democrat, has moved enough to pressure these swing state Republicans, at least on background checks, and maybe a little bit more than that. Yes, sir.
Would you put a limit on how many guns people could own?
That part, limiting the number of guns that they could own, has not been in my plan. But I'm open to the argument, basically. I do think, right, some people collect guns, old guns. You'd have to get into defining what that is, a working, operational, certain type of gun. So we didn't get into that part of it. But, I see the argument there. I'll just tell you, when people stockpile weapons, I think that makes a lot of people living around them very nervous about what are you going to do with those weapons. That's one of the reasons that I put in there that people would have to register a weapon that would be part of the ban, because we want to know where those are, right? And then institute a buyback program with it. So I am, I'm conscious of some of the challenge there. I didn't put that in there, but I'm open to hearing the argument. Yes, ma'am.
What about educators in schools?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm completely against arming teachers. I don't think that that's the answer. Y'all may have seen a couple of these incidents where students got into the gun that a teacher had in the school. I believe that I don't have a problem with if a school has a security guard or somebody that is there to help keep folks safe. from people coming in from the outside. I actually don't agree with using those police officers or security guards to impose discipline on the students. Because we've seen too often times that especially students of color, you know, disproportionately, they're treated differently by those police officers. So I do believe there's a role there and that they can help keep schools safe, and I understand that. I just don't think that you should mix that with the actual high school discipline environment. But hey, look, I mean, we want to keep our schools safe too, and I do see a reasonable role there, but not for arming teachers. I completely disagree with that. I also disagree with campus carry on college campuses. I think it's a mistake. I think that it's not very wise to mix somebody that's drunk, at the age of 18 or 19, with carrying a weapon on campus. And states like Texas have, I think, gone overboard, far overboard. And if you think about it, think about what happened in El Paso. And think about the argument that the NRA has been making about it's a good guy with a gun. We're in Texas. Texas has open carry, it has concealed carry, it has campus carry, it has one of the highest rates of gun ownership. That shooter knew that when he walked into that Walmart, the chances were that there were a lot of people that were carrying a weapon there. That didn't deter him. They have security there. Walmart, if you go to Walmart, Home Depot, wherever, they have security there. That didn't deter him. So I don't think that more guns is the answer, whether it's in schools or somewhere else. It's that we have to deal with this issue of the weapons that are out there, controlling them and controlling who gets weapons in the first place. And I think, in addition to that, we need to raise a generation of young people who see something other than violence as the way to solve problems in our society. Because I think that we've gone too far of people resorting to that first. Yes, ma'am.
What would you do, you talked about mental health care and making it, synonymous with physical health care. What would you do, or what would you propose be done with the children from Mexico that are being kept away from their parents in inhumane conditions? These children, where does this end and where do they go? Because we're not going to, in America, not going to be able to deal with Mexico and citizens from Mexico. So, at some point we are creating violence in these children, probably mental health issues as they grow up. What would you do about that?
Well, I mean, I would end that family separation and detention, right? So, that psychologists have said that that kind of traumatic experience can have a lifelong impact on these little kids, especially the ones that are separated from their parents for extended periods of time. And I mean, imagine that, not knowing where your mother is, your father is, and you're there sleeping with one of those Mylar blankets on a cold concrete floor. And they say that some of them don't even get toothbrushes and soap and so forth. I mean, nobody would want a child to grow up like that. And so my immigration plan would stop that. And the way that we would do that is that we would keep families together. And also, if you have a unaccompanied minor who shows up at the border, and because we do have some truly unaccompanied minors, we need to invest our resources in finding relatives. Oftentimes they have relatives already here in the United States, or a sponsor that will take them into a loving home, instead of keeping them there for who knows how long. They're only supposed to be there for a few days, but there are plenty of examples of kids who have been there a lot longer than that. Because the system, in part because the system has been overwhelmed. Right? But that means that we need to dedicate the resources, instead of having facilities like Homestead out there, or that or NEO facility near El Paso, dedicate that money to actually getting them into with their family members, and find a loving home for them, instead of traumatizing them the way that they have been. There are still, I think, a couple of dozen children who are still separated since 2018 from their family. And the Trump administration has been terrible about owning up to that and doing the work that it takes to go find those parents, where some of them are back in Central America. I actually hope in the future that there's some compensation for those kids and those families.
Yeah.
That there's some way that the United States compensates them for in some cases, maybe permanently, or at least for years, separating them until they find their parents, when they're adult or something.
And maybe getting them some mental health care to try to
Sure.
rectify what
Yeah, I mean,
we've done.
that was your question.
Yes.
Absolutely. I mean, they should be getting that now, and they get a very limited amount of that right now, is my understanding. And I think that we need to make sure that they're able to access that going forward. It's also, as many people have pointed out, it is a real shame that in the prison system we get more mental health care than in a lot of communities, just regular communities out here in the United States. That's how out of line our system is. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Your disarming hate focuses on obvious hateful acts. But there's a level of hate in this nation and people who are willing to tolerate it that Trump is exploiting. And he will win if he exploits enough of that. Each of the policies, each of the issues that you have talked about engenders in a relatively large group either hate or the ability to tolerate hate of those issues, or your position on those issues. I don't support her, but Marianne Williamson is the only one that's talking about a level of hate that's below the operational actor hate. It's people who feel it, people who Trump is recruiting successfully, and isn't that a worry to you that he will be successful in recruiting people not who are haters themselves, but who are willing for whatever reason to tolerate that hatefulness of others?
I mean, does that concern me? Sure, it concerns me. Do I believe that mechanically he's going to be able to win the 2020 election the way that he won in 2016? I don't think he is.
Good.
You know. And I mean, I'll just go into really quickly why, right? Remember, he really got spanked by Hillary Clinton. I mean, she beat him by 2.8 million more votes than he got. But he won in the Electoral College, and he won Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania by combined about 75,000 votes. And then he won Florida by, just over 1%. And that's always a close state. So to me, the question becomes, with this president running with a record instead of running as a theoretical, and has changed in 2016 versus more of the same in 2020, where more people know what the game is too. I think last time there were a decent number of Democrats that, either stayed home, and empirically people have shown that there were Democrats that stayed home, or some that voted third party. I think there's going to be more unity on the Democratic side this time. I think less people are going to stay home. In fact, more people are going to go out. And now he has a record. Now he's not just a theoretical. And that record, for some of the same very same folks, I don't think helps him. For instance, here in Iowa, there are people that are hurting in rural communities because he's been so erratic with China that it's cost jobs, that it's cost contracts. And so even if they may agree with him on the issue of guns, or they fall into that, some, not everybody, some fall into the category that you're describing, there are also these countervailing forces that I think give us an opportunity to pull some of them over to vote for a Democrat. And the first test of that was in 2018 in those states that I mentioned, not Florida, but the other states, and Pennsylvania. We won all but one, I think, major statewide race. So I believe that we can win in 2020. And what's happening in Texas is, and also Arizona and in Georgia, is that the suburbs are abandoning the Republican Party. Like they're abandoning them. That's why y'all are reading recently about Texas now being a competitive state, like really in play, because it's not just the old demographic change that people have been talking about. It's people there Actually, the demographic change is that they come from outside of Texas, you know, from California or Arizona or New York or Florida, wherever, and they live in the suburbs, and they were moderate Republicans, business Republicans basically, who have now abandoned Donald Trump. I think that's only going to accelerate, and that's going to especially be true for suburban women again. So I actually feel good about the 2020 election, although of course we can't underestimate him because he won last time.
I'll sleep better tonight, thank you.
Yes.
Do you think this about combating the disenfranchisement like in Georgia with the people that weren't allowed to vote, their votes didn't count?
Yeah, well, I was happy to see Stacey Abrams that ran for governor and would be governor if they hadn't thrown so many people off the rolls in Georgia. And it was the same guy that threw him off the rolls that ended up becoming governor. But I was glad to see that she's taken the initiative to launch that program to get more people registered and get out to vote and protect against voter suppression. So to answer your question, yeah, I believe that we need a Department of Justice that will actually be on the side of voters, potential voters, instead of appoint an Attorney General that is going to steadfastly enforce the Voting Rights Act and also work with me and our administration to put forward to Congress a stronger 21st Century Voting Rights Act, because we need it, and fight all of these efforts to throw people off the rolls, to impose strict voter ID requirements, also the gerrymandering that happens. I support legislation in Congress. I think it's H.R. 1 that includes independent redistricting, like Iowa has had more bipartisan or independent redistricting. All 50 states should have that. Right? All of that, plus the things that California and Oregon and I think Washington have done with automatic voter registration. Why shouldn't you automatically be registered to vote? As long as people know that you are eligible to vote and, you know, legitimately can vote, why not automatically register to vote? We need to take a page out of that, and also the work that folks have done in California on pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds. I actually think we should move the voting age at least down to 17 because well, first of all, I think it's true that these young people do grow up faster than ever. But if you think about it, if you think about 17 versus 18 for most people, when you're 18, like either you're right about to graduate or you just graduated, and maybe you're going to college or the working world or the military, but it's a time of real transition in your life. And you're not as rooted in a social dynamic like you are when you're a senior in high school, when you're 17. I think that if somebody can get registered at 17, we can fully use the institutional power of our high schools, right, to help register and drive people to vote for that first time and inculcate a culture of voting in our young people in a way that is harder when they're in between at the age of 18. So I think we need to move to people who are 17 at least being able to vote and pre-registration and so forth. Those are the kinds of things that I would yeah.
So even if we pass the sort of gun reforms that you've been talking about, there's still lots of really problematic things that circulate in the media and public about gun rights as sort of a constitutional right and these sort of wide belief systems. So I'm curious how you respond to the sort of maybe more middle-leaning voters about these sort of problematic understandings of gun ownership in the United States, so that, you know, how do you address those people to get them to be on board about this, even if, you know, because you pass it and they may be still disgruntled about it and another Republican will repeal it, so.
Yeah, I was watching the other day that clip of President Obama. Remember when he had a forum and they asked him a question? There's a gentleman that asked him a question about, you know, why do you want to take away all my guns? Probably some of y'all remember that. But that was, remember, the line that people believe in is, you're taking my guns, you're going to come for my guns, right? Right now, we're not hearing that as much because so much of the activity has been on the other side of people being fed up with watching these incidents happen over and over and over again. And so that argument has been kind of subdued in the conversation. But as you rightly know, it's there. It's still there for a lot of people. And I think that's part of the question you're asking. You know, and so what do you do about that? I think that means that as we pursue legislation and as we campaign out there, and now I'm using campaign in a broad sense, for these kinds of changes, that we need to do it in a way that recognizes the interests of people who want maybe want a firearm for self-defense. They want it because they go hunting or they go sporting, right? And tries to create a common coalition. Also, police officers, police chiefs around the country will tell you, like there was recently, you know, I think I want to say the Dayton police chief, one of the police chiefs right after what happened in Dayton, El Paso, said, you know, it's not a good idea for people to have these types of weapons. There is a coalition to be had, and to their credit, I think that Moms Demand and others are forging that kind of coalition. But it has to engage people where their common interest is. So that absolutely still has to be a part of the way that we move forward. Even then, there's still going to be people that will not accept it. But you know, our public policy making and politics is not about getting 95% support. You know, it's about getting majority support and hopefully growing your coalition from there. And that's what I think that we should do. All right, maybe 2 more questions. Yeah.
No, I don't understand why you'll sidestep the Second Amendment issue. It says nothing about ammunition. Why not government controlled ammunition?
Yeah, why not government controlled ammunition? Yeah, no, you know, so I would increase the tax, the excise tax on it. I would also make it easier to stamp or mark ammunition so that you give investigators, police investigators, more ability to track down the source of that. Some people have suggested that we regulate ammunition in the same way that we regulate firearms, right? With more aggressively. I'm open to that. Our plan does not focus on that, but that's a good point. I'm open to hearing those arguments. I saw one last question, or here and then there. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, with the suicides and shootings and just a lot of other things like college rates, going to college, that kind of rates, it's undeniable that this is mainly a male problem. Do you recognize that, and is there anything you would do to try to help and fight toxic masculinity?
Thank you very much for the question. You're right that the vast majority of these types of crimes that we see, certainly the mass shooting incidents, I'm having trouble thinking of one that was perpetrated by a woman, in fact. Also, everyday gun violence is still overwhelmingly committed by men. I think suicides is probably a little different, right? Probably still more men than women. That's why I believe that we have to get at how our young people, our kids learn, how they grow up. And that all of our institutions, our schools, our churches, our businesses play a role in that, and also our families play a role in that. And one of the things that I do think that we've been getting incrementally better about in this country when it comes to young men is getting them, number one, to respect women more the way that they should. Right? You think about what happened in our society over the last couple of years with the Me Too movement, and finally a reckoning about sexual harassment and sexual assault and taking that more seriously. And it's in that vein, I think, that we need to be thoughtful about how the next generation of young men is learning and the attitudes that they're adopting. And that's why I've said I think that education and understanding and the institutions that help raise our kids, along, of course, most importantly, with our families, have a role to play. You know, and I don't think that it's any one thing, it's not any one program. Right? It's all of those things together. Yeah?
Thanks for coming tonight. I'm sure you recognize that everyday gun violence is also a symptom of intergenerational poverty and racial injustices and trauma, especially in urban communities. How do you specifically, what's your vision to specifically address and uplift those communities to move away from this history of injustice?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. One of the things that I've tried to do in the policies that we put out on housing, on education, on police reform, on disarming hate, is to connect those dots. And that's why I called for investing more in our public civic schools and instituting universal pre-K and making sure that we close income inequality. And tomorrow we're actually coming out with a plan for families and including closing wealth inequality in our country. But combining that also with addressing the racial gap, whether it's on income or wealth or the way that people are treated by police, or educational opportunity, I think that we need to address those as well. So in the housing context, we have investment in more anti-discrimination efforts. In the education context, the same thing. And also the recruiting of teachers from diverse communities that can, effectively connect with students of different backgrounds. Talk about ensuring that people have equal housing opportunity so that people are not consigned to one part of town all the time, and that we don't forget those parts of town that have often been neglected, and a lot of times in our big cities are heavily minority. That all of that adds up if we work on it to better education, better opportunity for people who are poor, also for communities of color that have been long neglected, that will add up, I believe, to less gun violence. And that, in many ways, that creates a foundation for it that makes it more likely that unless we address that, we're never going to truly decrease it the way that we want to. And so the plans that we put out try and connect those dots. Okay, y'all, thank you very much.